Do you believe in synchronicity? I do. And let me ask you, what do Camel cigarettes, woodpeckers, redheads, and autism have to do with today's podcast? Good question. Why don't you join me? Did you know that 99% of you aren't subscribed? Why? Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and follow me. Hey everybody, Sean Early here. Today, a little bit different topic. I received a text message this morning from my sister, which kind of kicked off the topic of today's podcast. And I'll get into what that text message was all about. But I have to ask, I don't know if you believe it or not, but I'm a really strong believer in synchronicity. I've just personally experienced some things in my life that are just so contextually significant that you really have to say, okay, that is some serious, like, higher power, magical universe shit. So I don't know if you are religious or you believe in God or what your faith is or feeling about the powers of the universe, but sometimes, I don't know about you, but I experience certain things that are so not random that you really have to think, okay, something is really, there's some divine intervention going on there that is, the universe is sending me a message. And I don't always know what the message is, but you have to be like, wow, okay, that is so significant and so weird and so time sensitive that it's not anything. It's not just like random shit. And today, let me kind of step back. Today, I received a text message from my sister, and she said that the author Tom Robbins had died. And I have a story which I think is pretty interesting and pretty significant to me regarding Tom Robbins. So, kind of step way back. I lived in Ohio until I was about 10, lived on a farm in rural Ohio. And then, I was about 11. And then I moved to Seattle to live with my mom. And so I basically grew up in Seattle. I currently live in Germany right now, but I lived in Seattle for, must have been about 35 years or something. So a significant amount of my teens and 20s and 30s were in Seattle. And before I was 21 of drinking age, there was this coffee shop speakeasy place in the Seattle University district called The Last Exit. Pretty crazy, cool place. A lot of memories there, but it was just a lot of sort of hippie bohemian types. A lot of students from the University of Washington. A lot of kids who just didn't have anywhere else to hang out. If you didn't want to go to the clubs and bars, or like me, if you were under 21, you just needed a place to go and hang out. And I was never a very good person to just go and mingle and just go out and meet people. I always needed to go somewhere. I needed to be around people, but I couldn't stand like this whole, hey, how you doing? I'm Sean, blah, blah, blah. I wasn't a good mingler. I always needed to kind of sit in the corner and read a book and just kind of observe the world around me. And, I used to think it was because I was just kind of shy, but it turns out I'm just fucking autistic, which I'll talk about in another podcast in more detail. But I'll get into that a little bit later too. But, I used to go to these places. I used to go to, when I was drinking age, I would go to bars and just kind of sit in the corner and have a drink and sort of observe. And when I was underage, I would go to this coffee place called The Last Exit. And I just kind of sit in the corner. I'd read my book. I'd order coffee or get a tea, have a sandwich, and just kind of soak in what people are talking about, and people would go there and they would just talk, or they'd read, or, get together and play games, a lot of chess and Go. And, there was a open mic once a week where you could go in the evening and listen to music. My band played there a few times, met a lot of what came to be famous Seattle musicians there. I met some people I played in bands with there, a lot of friends I met there. So it was just kind of a really memorable place. It holds a fond place in my heart. It's no longer there, but it was a pretty wonderful place, which I don't think these kind of places really exist too much anymore in the world. People are so wrapped up in their phones and sitting in front of their TVs that I don't think this need to go out and engage on an intellectual level. These types of places, they're rare. So anyway, it was a wonderful place. And so one day I went there, I think it was in the afternoon, and they had in the middle of the place, they had these sort of big round tables where a lot of people could sit. And I went, and there was nowhere else to sit, so I sat down on one of these big round tables, and there's these two guys across the table having a conversation. And at the time, I mean, right now I have kind of grayish brown hair, as you can tell, not as much as I used to, but I used to have really long, curly, bright orange rocker hair. I was in a band. I had leather jackets. This was the Seattle kind of coming into the grunge period, so I was very rock and roll looking and played music, and so that was my look. I smoked and looked like a rock and roll guy, and so I sat down. I think I had my book. I had my pack of Camel cigarettes, which I sat down at the table, and just kind of sitting there, and I noticed these guys across the table were having a conversation. And it turned out the context of the conversation was, one guy was saying, yeah, it's true. You can look at a pack of Camel cigarettes, and inside subliminally, there's an actual drawing of a naked man inside the Camel. If you're looking at the guys, really? And the guy looked over at me and said, oh, you have a pack of Camel, let me see them. So I kind of got pulled into the conversation. And so they pulled the Camel pack and they looked at it and said, yeah, right here, this is where you can see there's a naked guy. And I don't know if that's actual intentional, but it's well known that there, if you look in the Camel, it could look like there's an actual naked guy. And I think it's funny because, all the marketing for Camel cigarettes moving out was Joe the Camel, and he looked like he had a big penis head. So I think there's some intentional subliminal messaging there, regardless of whether you can argue against it or not. But anyway, getting back to the story. So it turns out that the guy talking about this was Tom Robbins. Tom Robbins is a famous author. He wrote a lot of books, including Still Life with a Woodpecker and even Cowgirls Get the Blues. Skinny Legs and All. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. But anyway, he was talking about this book that he wrote to this guy, and he looks over at me, and I had long red hair, and I had a pack of Camel cigarettes, and I lived in Seattle, and he said, hey, well, anyway, I wrote this book. It's about redheads. It's about Camel cigarettes. It's about Seattle guys. Maybe you might want to check it out. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'll check it out. So Tom Robbins actually recommended his book to me based on the context of the fact that I was a redhead because I smoked Camel cigarettes. I lived in Seattle. And, the premise of the book is basically about these two sort of redheaded main characters. One is this European princess who, I don't know if I have to reread the book again to get all the context of the actual story. But anyways, this sort of European princess and her family, which kind of exiled into Seattle and just lived in the suburbs and basically lived in this normal house. And the woman falls in love with this other guy, his main character, who is like this outlaw who likes to blow stuff up, blow up these sort of, terrorist attacks on these establishment things. Again, I don't remember the context of what his focus was, but anyway, the two main characters were redheads. And I'm not going to spoil all the book, but interesting enough, basically the one guy, he basically blows something up or whatever and end up getting caught and going back to prison. And the woman, the princess, sort of falls in love with the guy, and out of protest for him being in prison, she basically locks herself in a room, removes everything, and kind of makes it look like it's a prison cell, so she can identify with his pain or whatever being locked in the prison cell. And she removes pretty much everything in a room except for this pack of Camel cigarettes. And so the pack of Camel cigarettes is basically her only sort of stimulus that she could look at. And she kind of starts to get lost into the messaging of the representation of what's in the Camel cigarettes and the pyramids and the camels and the words and stuff like that. But there's a lot of metaphors and symbolism and meaning in the book, and some people love the book, some people hate the book. I thought it was a great book at the time. I have to reread it in sort of my new, older, more analytical mindset and kind of see how I feel about it. But at the time, it was a book that I never read anything like that before. And it was sort of, it meant a lot to me because it was really sort of this, it's kind of like it kind of reminds me a little bit of like a mixture between like, Catcher in the Rye mixed with a Cheech and Chong movie. It's like it goes off in these crazy trippy things. And I think the premise of the book is basically it's sort of a love story about sort of making the best out of things, or also I guess some of the messaging is sort of things aren't always what they seem, so you have to make what you can out of the things in context of what they are. And there's one reference where the author is talking about his sort of relationship with this red Remington typewriter that he has. It's sort of this love-hate relationship where the typewriter is really fast at just writing certain types of things like stories and stuff, but it's no good at writing poetry, and so he uses pen and paper to write poetry, and so he has this creative love-hate battle with this piece of technology that he uses for his livelihood, basically. And I kind of relate to that in a little bit because, as you know, I play guitar, I make music. I have a lot of videos where I talk about that as well. But, I really resonate with that relationship with the technology in a way that I have a love-hate relationship with my guitars. I love playing them, and at the same time, sometimes creatively, it's such a battle. It's like a rocky relationship I have with these instruments. And the same with my computer that I use to make music on too. Certain things work well for creating certain things don't. And it's this constant love-hate battle I have with my instruments and my technology that, I love and hate at the same time. And also it's kind of an interesting reference in terms of being autistic. And I have a whole podcast where I talk about that. But anyway, being well, right now I'm self-diagnosed as autistic. I am currently seeking a diagnosis, so I have an official piece of paper. But I've done so much research over the past couple of years that it's pretty clear that I am autistic. It explains a lot of the challenges I've had in my life. And it's kind of a sort of a new identity that I've been having to try to deal with. It's a full-on identity crisis, really, trying to come to the realization that some of the challenges and all the things that I had in my life really turn out to be autism, and that is now really a significant part of who I am. It's in my DNA. It's a neurological thing that will not change about me, so I have to sort of come to terms with it. And so it's sort of a new way of getting to deal with what I have, and also coming to a new sort of relationship with what it is, which I guess is also a metaphor for the book. So in a way, it's just very strange, this new identity I have, and trying to come up with a new way to sort of deal with the personality that I am, because over my life, I've always sort of masked my challenges and my issues and my Tourette's that I have, and try to cover it up. And I think my personality in the past would always, this overcompensation, this mask for what I really was. And now that I'm sort of trying to remove these masks of covering things up, you kind of come to this sense of you don't really know who you are anymore, because it's a whole new identity that you have to define for yourself. And I think if you're autistic as well, you probably understand this, especially with late diagnosed autistics. So, in context of the book, again, it's really about making, things are different than what you think they are, and it's always having to make the best out of what you have. There's an interesting quote in the book which I want to read here. It's not a very long podcast. I just want to talk about this because it was pretty timely. But anyway, there's an interesting quote that I read in the book here, that when the princess was kind of locked in her self-isolation, whatever it was, and she was staring at the pack of Camel cigarettes, I think there was a part on the pack that said choice. It's kind of like, probably had something to do with like the choice blend of fine Turkish tobaccos, or I don't know, something like that. Anyway, I don't smoke anymore, so I don't have a pack around me. But anyway, there's a quote that Tom Robbins has in the book, and basically says, "A person is looking for a simple truth to live by. There it is, choice. To refuse to passively accept what we've been handed by nature or society, but to choose for ourselves, choice. That's the difference between emptiness and substance, between a life actually lived and a wimpy shadow cast on an office wall." And I think that's pretty significant, especially in terms of what I'm going through right now, really just trying to redefine who I am and how I want to live my life with this sort of new reality that I have. And I think it's pretty crazy that, the guy who wrote this book about this particular topic basically in my life, I just sat down in a coffee shop and he basically just handed it to me and said, hey, here's this book that really has probably a lot of context for you in your life. It's pretty bizarre. And it's funny too that today I actually woke up and I was like, well, I have a little bit of time today to do a podcast, but I'm not really sure what I want to talk about. And then bing, I open up my phone and there's a text message from my sister said, hey, Tom Robbins died. And I was like, whoa, that is some weird fucking synchronicity right there. That is some weird universal message. And again, I don't know what that means, but I think it really has something to do with, make the best of what you can and make your decisions in terms of how you want to deal with it and choose to plan your life accordingly based on what you have. And this quote is pretty memorable to me. So anyway, I don't know what to make of it, but it's just some weird, interesting, magical shit, synchronicity, whatever you call it. But I've had enough of these experiences in my life where I don't think they're just random. There's some meaning behind it. And, the fact that Tom Robbins wrote this book that has so much sort of symbolic meaning to me, it's pretty crazy and what I'm going through right now. But again, I have a whole other podcast where I'll be talking about autism and all that. But anyway, Tom Robbins died today, and he wrote some really, really amazing books, and they were pretty meaningful to me and all the stuff that I'm going through in my life. And so, Tom, if you're out there in the universe, rest in peace. Thank you, brother. So that's all I have for today. You should check out the book and read it. I'd be curious to think what you think about the book. And also, if you are autistic or dealing with some sort of neurodivergence or later diagnosed neurodivergence, I'm curious to think, to hear what you have to say about this topic. So that's it. It's a short podcast today. I'm Sean Early, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.